What's up, guys? Okay. Okay, so hi everybody, welcome back to step one. This is episode something. I don't know what order I'm gonna put this in, but you know, what else. I'm joined today by my good friend Linnea McDonald.
Hello.
Hi. Would you mind telling people who you are and what you do?
So as Kyle said, I am Linnea McDonald. I went to
Wow.
school with Kyle at Nyack.
You sure did.
Yeah, 3 whole years because they accepted all of my credit. So I graduated on time after transferring.
Amen.
Oh boy. Yes, amen. Thank you, Jesus.
Amen.
I don't need more debt.
I shouldn't graduate, but God. Anyway, sorry. Go. God works miracles. Okay, yeah.
But after graduation, I moved to Seattle, Washington, where I am now a youth pastor. And so that's what I'm doing. That's who I am. I could tell you a random fun fact. I love long walks with specifically just my dog. So that's always a good time.
All right. So cool. The topic for today is I'm eating and I'm choking. But
that we'll pray.
Amen. Yes. Praise. The topic for today is necessary steps towards peace. And I asked you this partially because for two reasons. For one, you and I had a talk once this whole thing kind of blew up in our group chat. You were talking about, you said a really good point. I'll let you explain it later if you want to, but you were talking about a really good point that the road towards peace isn't always a peaceful one. And I thought that was amazing and fire. And I think more people needed to hear that. So that's reason number one. Reason number two is that while we were at college together, there were quite a few things that upset both of us that were just super fun experiences. We loved it so much. But it was always cool being able to talk to you because as I would rant and sound like a psychopath, you would be like, you know, there's points to it. Like, that makes sense. Like, I get why you're that. And then in my head, I'm just like, wow, maybe I'm not crazy. So that always feels good. It always feels good to have a friend that makes you feel like you're not crazy. And one thing that I think you're like almost supernaturally gifted at, I mean, granted you're a human being, so in the moment maybe it's not like immediate. But, when you and I talk, it's good that you have this ability to see other people's perspectives really well. In areas where I'm a little bit more stubborn to just be like, no, they're a horrible person, and they suck. And you're like, no, I mean, like, no. And it's weird because I'm a 9, so I should be better at that. But
I'm the one.
I know, it should be, you know, whatever. But you're good at breaking down other people's perspectives to a point where it's like, it's no longer demonizing people, you're making them human again. And I think that's really, really cool. And that's a gift straight from God. So I wanted to know a little bit more about like how you became someone that's willing to see other people's perspectives more easily. And we'll jump off from there and see where that goes.
I'd say a lot of it just started with the fact that I myself was someone where I just grew up in a situation where I was misunderstood. There are just so many things. I would honestly say it was something just from being born, like, you know, being a teenage pregnancy in a super Christian family that has this long line of, you know, pastors and missionaries in it. And to kind of almost be seen as the physical, you know, manifestation of this family's sins and screw ups, it just led to adults, some that I have not met to this day, who just didn't like me because of what I represented in their eyes. And so then growing up poor, that does a lot to you because
Yeah.
people have opinions. I lived the very poor area of our neighborhood, like of our town. Um, like it was subsidized housing, government's helping pay our rent type of thing. We were on food stamps, and my mom was making it work, taking care of our family off of $10,000 a year type of thing. So,
Right.
you know, people just viewed me for almost my whole entire life based off of things that weren't true about who I was. They just saw the factors that surrounded my life and then assumed my character and the type of person I was. And being someone who's gone through, different types of traumas as well,
Yeah.
being sexually abused, physically abused, verbally abused by people, my heart just started to go out to people and wanting to almost protect them in a way. And when I see people be like, when I know someone personally, for example, and I care about them and I know that there is good in them, and someone else doesn't like them for whatever reason, and they just, start going off about this person. But I've gotten to know them, and while they're not perfect, because no one's perfect, I do know the good pieces of their character. And it just led me to be a person saying, no, like that's not true. And I was always just a weird kid, and I would tell the truth probably a bit more often than other kids would. I would argue with teachers about telling the truth if they told me to lie and stuff about like Santa Claus and stuff. I was like, lying's wrong.
It doesn't make sense.
That's where the moral perfectionist comes in. I'm a one. But I guess it just is rooted in wanting people to be seen for who they actually are. And, especially when I got into college, and I would say this only helped refine it even more, like I realized how angry and bitter I was in the things that I did that were hurtful and wrong. And my sin just kind of was there in front of me. And especially being sexually abused, like I had a lot of anger and resentment towards men specifically, and I would let it out on men who didn't deserve that anger. And it made it where I couldn't form relationships of any kind with guys. And God, especially at Nyack, really challenged me on that and softened my heart towards it, and was like, these are people you don't even know, and you're not giving them a chance, and they're not all bad. And so it just made me want to fight more for people to be seen for who they actually are, and then for the potential of the person they can be. I think when I look at people, I don't just see who they are now, I see who they could be. And that's not me to say like I know everything, but you see good qualities in someone, and you're like, if you refine that, you could be, an amazing whatever. And so seeing people beyond where they are now, but where they can be when they start growing some more. So I don't know if that answers your question very well, but okay.
Thank you. No, I think it takes a lot of strength to take all that bad stuff and turn it into something good and productive and God honoring. I think that takes a lot of strength, and it says a lot about who you are as a person. So, I mean, I got a lot of respect for you anyway, but yeah, thank you so much for sharing that. I really appreciate it.
Oh, of course.
Yeah, I definitely, we vibed on some of our traumas, which is always fun. Trauma buddy. Anyway. Debating whether or not I'll edit that out. We'll see. But no, I definitely, I feel that. I think I don't know, those kind of hard experiences really do shape a person, and you do have like one of two choices. You can be very cold, and I think that's a very natural response. You can be cold and block out the world, And I know in my life, I've definitely done that. But I think the choice always comes into like, hey, am I going to stick in this brokenness forever? I'm going to put on the label of victim. And am I going to allow this horrible experience to shape who I am rather than allowing God to? And that for sure is not an easy decision to make. And it's been cool walking with you and seeing you grow into that and you helping me grow into that as well. So that's been amazing. One thing I will say is it's hard.
It ain't easy.
It's not easy. It is very hard to go through a ton of stuff and still choose to see the good in people and still believe that like God's good himself. I think for me, when I was processing a lot of my trauma and a lot of my stuff, I was very much like, yo, God, you're in control, right? Cool. So you made this happen. You're horrible. And that's not like, now that I'm understanding more of who God is, and thank God for going to a Christian school and them like breaking it down. I know that's not his character. I know he wouldn't do that, but it was still so hard for me to break through that. And I know one thing that happens with trauma often is like triggers, which I don't really have to explain to you, but for those watching that maybe don't have any sort of trauma, triggers are just things that help you, not help is a relative term, force you to relive certain parts of your trauma. And that's where I have trouble. That's for sure. There are certain people that I come in contact with that they just speak, and this like unbridled rage from the depths of I don't know where just come up. And it's not even them, like they'll say something and sure it was bad, but it wasn't that bad. But because of what it rubs against, I get defensive, and sometimes I just completely not even give people a chance. And that doesn't always end well. It never ends well. Have you experienced that, and how's that been for you? Just like...
Yeah, so I definitely have triggers. But I'm reminded specifically of one situation when I got to Nyack. And so part of the reason why I left my first school was because there was a guy on that campus who tried to get me off campus alone with him by lying to me, and then stalked me the next semester. And that was kind of like, I was already having a rough time with that school, but that experience was what really just solidified my decision of I need to get out of here.
Right.
And I go to Nyack, and I think it was only like the first couple of weeks of school, and I heard someone talking. Like I was over by where the microwave was in the caf, and I heard someone talking, and he sounded almost exactly like him.
Oh yeah.
And it set me off. I was like, you're not supposed to be here. I'm on the other side of New York. If I met people who had like a similar personality to this guy, I would almost immediately just have a defensiveness building up inside of me. And there were times, especially the first semester, where I was snappy with them. I was mean to them for no reason. They're probably questioning what the heck was going on. They're like, this girl doesn't like me and I don't know what I did, but okay.
That's how it goes. Yeah. Felt that.
And it would just be things about them that would remind me of that person. And I would say a lot of my triggers have happened, for the most part, though, in situations where it's someone I never see again. Like I get bothered on the street or something, and that's what really sets me off. Like I hate it when people honk their horn at me, because that whole instance at school happened in a car. And
I hate when this happens. This always happens. Technical difficulties. We're back again. Okay.
Yeah. My internet doesn't like me. So
mine either. I feel you.
talking about cars and how it happened in a car. So,
Mm.
like being honked at by people and stuff like that, it just sets me off. But I would say for the most part, I'm past the point where, you know, if I meet someone who's like that person, I get scared and defensive.
Yeah.
I've worked past that point. It's mostly just, you know, if someone bothers me in public, someone harasses me, and things like that, that sends me into more of like a fight or flight mode, where it's like either I'm going to try and run away, or depending on the situation, I might pull out my keys. Who knows?
Yeah. She has like a cool little unicorn horn. She uses to stab people. It's awesome.
Yeah, I do. They're legal. I also have pepper spray in my bag, so.
Oh, that's sick. You're set. Don't mess with her. It's interesting because, like, hearing you talk about it, I definitely see a lot of myself in it, where it's like, I think I'm still moving past certain parts. Like, there's people that look like people that traumatized me, and I'm like, go away. But it takes, I don't know, I guess strength is the right word. There's like a lot of strength to push past that. Going back to your story of like where you grew up and stuff, I'll let you talk a little bit more about that. But on paper, hearing your story, you, at least to me, I would totally understand if you just chose to be someone that was ignorant when it came to the things that are happening right now in the world, when it comes to like white privilege or police brutality against POC and Black Americans and like stuff like that. Like you could, on paper, choose to be very ignorant about that and just say, yo, I have a hard life too, so whatever, I made it work, kind of a thing. But you once again, like I said, supernatural ability, you chose to like push through that and be like, okay, I'm not just gonna choose to like navel gaze and see the world through my eyes. I want to see it through someone else's. That must have took a lot of work and a lot of fighting, I'm assuming. Could you talk about that a little bit more?
Yeah, so I grew up in a pretty white neighborhood. It was just a very white area. There, like the people of color, you could probably count on like two hands in my graduating class. It was just very few.
And in some
And
places, two hands is a lot.
yeah. But there weren't many. And what spoke in my town was predominantly money, because there were so few people of color that when you don't have a lot of diversity or any diversity at all, someone still has to be the oppressed group. That's just the reality of life. And because for some reason, as humans, we like to pick on each other, and that's what we naturally just start doing. So in my town especially, like if you didn't have money, you were the scum of the earth, and if you had money, you got everything. And there was no, and like money doesn't discriminate. So if you were Black, if you were white, if you were Asian, whatever you were, if you had money, your money was more important than someone's racism. Like that person could be racist, but because you have money, they're going to accept your money above staying true to their prejudice.
Right.
So, you know, I grew up with a compromised education. Like I went into kindergarten on time, but I could have skipped a year because I was so smart. And despite that, all throughout elementary school, I was told I was stupid by teachers almost consistently. I had 2 teachers who were nice to me. And as I got older, I realized a lot of it really had to do with my economic status. Like I think it was probably about 5th grade where it finally hit, where I looked at the students who were getting special attention. And all these students came from wealthy families whose parents donated to the school, whose parents went to every field trip, whose parents, you know, donated food or, you know, different things for like parties and stuff. And they were just super involved in the school. And my parents, they didn't do that. Like, my mom was working almost all the time. By third grade, my mom had my little brother, and then a year after that, my little sister was born. So it's 2 toddlers in the house, and my dad was a stay-at-home dad, so he didn't have time. So because also our economic status, I definitely didn't wear nice clothes. I think I got my first like brand new clothes when I was in like 6th grade. I just, you know, we went to Salvation Army, we went to every thrift store, yard sales, stuff like that. Because my mom just couldn't afford to buy brand new clothes for kids who were still growing, type of thing. And like, it's because she didn't want to, it's just, it was not going to be smart in the long run, money wise.
It's expensive.
Yeah, especially when your kid might be in a new t-shirt every couple of months. Yeah, exactly. Their shoes are changing every couple of months, things like that. So it wasn't until like 7th grade that I had a teacher look at me and say, like, Linnea, you're smart. You know that, right? It was a history teacher who stopped me one day, and because I was asking about what my grade was, and it was pretty high. I had like a 98 in the class, and he was like, Linnea, you know you're smart, right? Because I was really nervous. And I just remember standing back, and I was surprised. And it wasn't until, you know, high school and middle school were weird because they were in the same building. So it wasn't really like a change. It was like you went to elementary school and then you were in the big school type of thing.
Wow.
So yeah, small town. Everything's together. But, and so in high school, the teachers were less, they were more willing to invest in students who were genuinely smart. And I think part of that is just because certain things were based on grades, but like there was still other ways I noticed, like I was being shortchanged. There's the Honors Society program that they have, where if you are really smart, you get into the Honor Society. It took, I think, until like my freshman year for me to finally get into it. And I remember just being really angry because at one point I was yet again not brought into it, despite the fact that I had a 90 or above average throughout all of middle school and high school. And at one point, a girl who was next to me, she got up and got her award for being put into the Honor Society program, which is supposed to be for smart students. And she sat down. Well, that's basically what she told me. She then looked at me and she said, I think I only got this because my mom's a teacher because I'm failing 2 classes right now. I was like, you're what? Wow. like she was genuinely telling me, like, I don't deserve this. And there were plenty of other people who got up who were given awards, and they had lower grades than me. Like, I knew they had lower grades. Some of them were my friends who I knew did not have as good grades as I did. But it was just obvious that, you know, money and social status was so important in this town. And it decided so much of how good your education was. You know, I was a big theater kid, and almost consistently a ton of the students who got, you know, good parts and stuff were students whose parents, you know, were musical boosters. Like, they donated to the school, they were participated in stuff. And despite the fact that, you know, and this isn't just about me at this point, this is about other students too, who, you know, they spent so much time and dedicated so much time to programs like that, and then they got shortchanged for a kid whose parent, you know, is donating X amount of dollars every month to the school. And and so it also just leads to perceptions even outside of school. I distinctly remember having a friend in high school where I went over to her house to help her with homework, and she was a grade ahead of me. So here I am helping someone who's ahead of me with her homework.
Right.
And after we were done hanging out, because we did homework and then we hung out for a bit at her house, her dad dropped me off back at my house, where it was the manor, and it was apartment complex, subsidized housing. And the next day, her younger sister comes up to me and says, "My mom doesn't like you," and then walks away. And I was like, "Oh, okay."
They're
And
so
then later I
honest,
was
little kids.
Yeah.
Sorry.
But the nenext day, people in high school are awful.
Right.
They are rude, terrible.
I hate
Like, and the parents who raise their kids to be like that, like, their parents aren't any better.
Mm.
But I was then talking with my friend, and she's like, "Yeah, my parents don't want you over anymore."
Mm.
Because their dad saw that I lived in the manor, and then he went so far as like calling it the projects. And he was like, "She lives in the projects." And despite the fact that I went over to their house, I am like stupidly respectful to people, like, especially at that age, I was really respectful to adults.
Right.
I was always in my best behavior. I would like tense up and get scared because I was so used to, parents and adults just being mean to me and not liking me. And so I did like my very best to give a good impression.
Yeah.
And so here I was helping their daughter with homework, hanging out, being as respectful as possible. We only stayed in the living room and dining room. It's not like we traveled around the house or anything. And they didn't want me over because they were like, "She lives in the manor, she lives in the project. She can only be anything but trouble.
Dang.
Like, that's all she's gonna be."
And
so,
yeah.
There was this, people would find out where I was from and they would think I must be a thief, or I must be doing drugs, or, drinking, doing all these things that I didn't do. Like, I was stupidly well behaved.
Right.
I'm to this day, I'd never drank or smoked in my life. And part of that's from, coming from a family where I watched that destroy one of my parents.
Right.
So I was like, of course I don't want to do that. Like, of course I'm not going to make the mistakes my parents made because I see where it got them because I'm living it. Mm-hmm. So of course I'm not going to do that. And that was my mindset. So, it was weird going to NIAC and then being perceived as someone who must have money, and being perceived as someone who must have had a very easy life, because I fought tooth and nail for everything I had. And initially, like, it felt very erasing of my experience. And I this is going to be an unpopular thing to say, but I do genuinely believe there were people whose only intent was to try and erase my experience.
Yeah. I'm sure there was, honestly.
Some people, I think it was just genuinely, I do believe for the most part, it was people who their world looked so much different than mine. Mm-hmm. Because I recognize that my hometown is not what everywhere looks like. Mm-hmm. Because there's diversity in so many other places. And so I eventually I got to the point where I realized, where you live, you're the oppressed group, and white people are the ones who have all the money and status, and they get everything handed to them. They get all the roles in the plays, they get all the solos in orchestra, they get to be in every program, they're recognized at every, award ceremony. But for a while it was hard, because I was sitting there like I had to fight for everything I had. What do you mean I have white privilege? And I don't think it helps when people use it as a way to insult you. I don't think telling people about their white privilege in a manner and a tone that is to bring shame upon someone is going to be productive in any context. I now understand how it is beneficial to understand what it is, because it helps you learn empathy for a people group that you we'll never know their experience.
Right.
But when it is being used to thrust shame upon a person, like as Christians, we know shame isn't going to transform hearts.
No. Yeah.
It's not going to.
Right.
And so, you know, when educating people on these things, it's so important that you understand the tone and the attitude you are using when you do it.
Right.
And some people are going to listen, and some people just aren't going to, because it is something that people don't want to hear.
Mm-hmm.
And it's hard for them to understand if they genuinely feel like my life wasn't easy.
Right.
So what do you mean I have this? Because they view it solely through economics.
Mm-hmm.
They view it as you're being handed physical things, which sometimes is the case. But when it comes to this racial privilege, it's
Mm-hmm.
not talking about what you're being handed economically all the time. Like white people aren't just being given houses because they're white.
Right.
Stuff like that.
Right.
It's, you're more likely to get a loan.
Right.
Because your neighborhood, because you're white, is more likely to have a good school.
Mm-hmm.
You know, it's all these things that add up to socially you are perceived as this, so that is why you get these benefits.
Yeah,
and then it can lead to those things. And like, I can give an example. I get mad whenever I think of this. So my first school, it was actually the guy who stalked me.
Mm-hmm.
He had this like story, this, you know, sob story about his life. And I won't go into specifics because it's not my story to tell.
Yeah.
But he had this sob story, and he lived in inner city Rochester for a portion of his life. Then later on, he was taken out of that situation by being adopted by a pretty well-off white family.
Mm-hmm.
He is also white.
Mm-hmm.
And the school wanted to give opportunity to inner city kids because, you know, Roberts Westland is right next to Rochester, New York.
Right.
And Rochester is a city that is very much steeped in racism. Like the foundation of that city is based in racism. The city was intentionally put together by people telling the banks, this will be the white neighborhoods, this will be the black neighborhoods. You don't give, you know, something to, you don't give a black person a house in a white neighborhood type of thing, or a white person a house in a black neighborhood.
It's pretty common back then, yeah, unfortunately.
I don't know if that still holds true today, but the segregation still exists.
Yeah.
And the school wanted to give a free ride to someone to their school to be, you know, here's us being charitable. And they gave it to,
sorry.
they gave it to a white kid.
Mm-hmm.
And who isn't even living there anymore. Isn't living in he grew up as a child in inner city Rochester. He's no longer there. He got adopted.
That took a turn. Yeah. I'm sorry.
So but you know, it's just things like that of that stuff I thought about as I, you know, processed finally what it is. I kind of skipped a lot of getting to the road of like finally being where I am now, where I view it. But it's like stuff like that where you look at it and you're like, there are significantly more people of color who have no chance of getting out of Rochester, New York without help. And you gave it to a white kid who's already out.
Right.
And you know, it's just stuff like that. It's like, how can you not say it doesn't exist? Like, this kid has the same story as every other kid in that city. Some of their stories are even worse.
Right.
And you gave it to someone who probably had the means to pay for college themselves, instead of giving it to someone where, you know, they're never going to get out of the city without help. Like, there are people who are born in that city and they die in that city and they never leave.
Wow.
And it's sad. Like, I got a very small glimpse of it by tutoring in inner city Rochester. And I spent a lot of time with a teenage girl in high school, and I was tutoring her in her classes. And to see her heart, like I would offer to go and get her stuff for like her birthday and Christmas. And eventually I noticed she was asking for stuff to give to her siblings because they didn't have things. And like that broke my heart.
Right.
To know that this girl who she has time to spend, she has the right to be selfish and make it all about her and do everything she wants and get everything she wants out of it. And she's like, no, I'm going to ask for my little sister's favorite candy so I can give it to her. And so, you know, it's just, anyway, I'm going on a tangent at this point, but it's just things that I noticed after, you know, being able to have God convict my heart for me. But I don't know if there was anything you wanted to pull out of that.
No, yeah. Thank you so much for sharing once again. But it's hard, especially to talk about like white privilege to someone who honestly has a very hard life, and like for some people, whether you're black or white or whatever, like as another human being, your life might be harder than mine. And for me to tell you like, hey, the country is geared towards you more than it is to me feels like a slap in the face of someone's experience. So I hear that, and it's like it's hard to explain that in a loving way because the words themselves feel unloving.
Yeah.
But I don't know. It's difficult because even if they haven't benefited from it per se, like haven't benefited from it in a way that's like, oh, you're white, therefore you get this position, like you're the guy who is not your friend. I almost said your friend. He's definitely not your friend.
Nope.
no, ma'am. But that guy, in his experience, like it may not look like that. It may not look like, hey, you get this free check because you check off the box of being white. Like it's not like that. But the point that you made of like being trapped almost in certain scenarios, like if you're down, you're down and there's no coming back up kind of a thing. And honestly, I don't know. I'm open to the fact that because of my hurt and because of my own trauma and the trauma I've seen in my own family, I could be biased in this way, but I feel like even when you succeed, there's a lot of people trying to push you down. And it feels like, yo, dang.
Yeah.
Yeah. And it's like, it's hard to explain that to someone when they themselves are struggling. So I think one thing that's super important for people to take from this also is just like, yo, as a Black person, there's a lot of anger, there's a lot of frustration towards the system itself and people that may benefit from it. But you have to realize that the people that are in front of you are human beings and not representations of all your trauma. So it's not fair of me to be like, hey, Linnea, oh, wait, I just realized you're white. You, like, it's not, you can't just do that to people. Like, the stuff that I've been through isn't a result directly of you. And you specifically have been super cool and really awesome to talk to. And I haven't really experienced really any, like, inkling of racism from you. But there's
I'm glad.
Congratulations. I'm sorry. But there's like other people that I love, but honestly, they've said and done things that have been quite offensive. And even when I've let them know, it's kind of, I've gotten a response of like, oh, you're being sensitive, you're being a snowflake, or oh, I'm obviously not racist, I wouldn't invite you to my house, or kind of a thing. And it's not like, yo, racism isn't necessarily like you want to hang me from a tree, though that is racism, but
Mhm.
like it's also just ignorance, willful ignorance. Like it's not really taking the time to know somebody because you don't think it's worth it, kind of a thing. You don't really care about someone else's experience. And one term that's I've heard of for a majority of my life, but now it's starting to pick up speed again is white fragility. Um, which to explain it is when someone talks about something like systemic racism or talks about white privilege or talks about something like that, and the immediate response of a person is to be defensive, and instead of looking into the world that other people live in and hearing people out, they take it as a personal attack and are like, yo, you don't know me, you don't know my life, I have black friends, kind of a thing. And it's like, yo, that's not helpful. um so I don't know, all that to say, I think just like it took you like a lot of fight to get out of that mindset of like, hey, yes, my life is hard, but I realized that my life experience is not the experience of everyone in the entire world.
Mhm.
And I live in a world where like if I want to function in other places, I have to be able to realize like, hey, um you are oppressed too, as well as like, hey, there's experiences that I've had that like I'm not like, because you're not in your same town, you don't have to deal with the same stuff, praise God. But
Yeah.
other people still unfortunately have to, and that takes a lot of strength to look out of yourself and like go do. But it also takes a responsibility on my part and other black people's part where we have to deal with our anger in a real way that isn't necessarily attacking just white people for being
Yeah.
white. Um, it feels unfair. I understand the anger firsthand, um, but it's not beneficial to anyone
Mhm.
to just curse out the first white person you see, kind of a thing. I see some of my friends on Facebook just going off on people's comments.
Mhm.
And I get like some people that I see on Facebook and even from my church or from old schools or whatever, they are trying to do the right thing and it might come off wrong. And instead of like being like, hey, lovingly, hey, like I understand why you're doing this or why you said this, but realize like X, Y, and Z, it's more of like, you're a horrible person, you're fake. And like that's not helpful.
Yeah.
Um, what am I trying to get? Yeah, okay. So all that to say, I said that like 3 times. Um, Going back to your original point that started this whole topic, the road to peace isn't always peaceful.
Mhm.
That doesn't necessarily mean, hey, let's destroy the world and watch everything burn and maybe we'll find peace. But like on the inside, you're not going to feel very peaceful because you're going to come against your entire worldview.
Mhm.
You're going to be told by people that you're wrong. And if that's something difficult for you, this is going to be a very difficult season.
Mhm.
Um, and that's on both sides. I've been told by people things that I thought were very true that I'm finding out like, oh, maybe that's misguided, or oh, maybe I'm wrong for this. And I have to willingly look at myself and like, okay, I'll think about this, or okay, I'll consider this, or okay, like you're entirely right, I was wrong for this.
Mhm.
That takes a lot of strength, but if we're going to get to a place where we can build a bridge and we can build connection and we can actually reach peace, it has to be a fight on both sides towards the same thing and not a fight against each other.
Yeah.
um and I don't know, man, not a lot of people seem down for that. But I really am hoping that more people will be down for the actual like rebuilding of our original design to work together, to live with one another, to love one another. But I guess you can't really do that without acknowledging the hurt, acknowledging the trauma that's been there for years, both outside with each other, but also inside of ourselves.
Yeah.
So,
And I think it's so important that, you know, when you meet someone who is struggling, and I think I was this person, and I had a couple different reactions, because I'll admit there was a lot of stuff that I had to deal with that was things that were taught to me
right.
that were okay, that I eventually realized were not okay. And like certain mindsets that were given to me that were toxic and hurtful. And I came to a point of realizing, like, that's just messed up. Why would you even think that way?
Right.
But as I was going through this journey of, you know, having to unlearn so many things, and yes, I understand the things that I were taught were evil and hurtful. One that I always think of is, and it makes me mad every time I think about it, and the fact that, like, I was young, I was really little when, like, people would say this to me, but it was just like, and I want to take less off of how I was hurt, because what their statement said was so based in, like, just treating someone else as less than. And they were using that to then insult me. And the fact that they were doing that at all was so wrong. But being a bigger person, you know, I think I was 11 the first time I had someone look at me and say, like, you'll probably never end up with somebody, and if you do, you're going to end up with a black guy, because only black guys like girls like you, because you're ugly to everyone else. And yeah,
Wow.
that was like the mindset. That was the mindset that so many people around me had. And I would be told stuff like this, like, you probably won't end up with a white guy or any other, you know, race other than black or maybe Hispanic, because you're a bigger girl, you're not stick thin. Wow. So therefore you are unattractive. And so therefore only these more unattractive people would like you. And it was used, like, and they wouldn't say it just to me, but they would say it to other people. And, like, if a girl decided, and I'm sure it happens to men as well, but if a girl decided to date someone of a different race, they were seen as, like, you're shortchanging yourself.
Wow.
Yeah, like, this was the stuff that was taught to me by, and not by my parents, thank God, they were good people, right. But like, people, just like friends in my life, like the environment I grew up in, like, this was normal stuff, and this was how people just naturally thought, and it was awful. And so, you know, I definitely had things stuck in my head that were wrong that I needed to work on. And that's just an example of, like, one thing where I remember I was alone actually by myself, and I was like, wow, that's just messed up. Like, why would you think that? Why would you decide that a whole race is less worthy of a relationship than being with you? Like, if you, and these are the same people who in the same breath would say, but I'm not racist.
Right.
And so it was like, clearly you,
there's a disconnect.
Yeah. You might not be lynching people.
Right.
But you definitely think that you're better solely on the fact that you are white.
Right.
And so, you know, going into NIAC, there were things that I thought and things I joked about that I'm definitely not proud of. But, you know, it's looking at someone not as an enemy, but as a potential ally. And so, you know, I had two different reactions. I had some people who were just, you know, they saw a white person and they saw privilege and they saw entitlement, and they saw a person who got handed everything, and they probably, you know, didn't have to worry about all the debt they were putting themselves into by going to college, and someone else was probably paying for their books. And so there was this view of me as this entitled person who just expected the world to be dropped into my lap, and was completely ignorant, and didn't, you know, I was that I wasn't outwardly being racist towards the fact of, like, saying, like, horrible things like, I don't believe in the mixing of the races, or I don't want a black neighbor, things like that. But, you know, I must be this person who is that person, like, well, I have a black friend, so therefore I must be good. I don't think I was horrible, but there were things I needed to work on. And so when you have someone look at you and they barely even know you and they just say, you know, you're trash because you're white, and making fun of you, calling you a cracker, calling you a colonizer, and assuming that all, I guess it would be ethnicities of white people. It's not something you see very often. That's a whole nother conversation. Yeah. But white people are so intermixed that we just see each other as just the same, all European. It is what it is.
Europe is a big place, you know.
But you know, it's just like, in saying statements like that, it's like showing the ignorance of themselves, of like, you don't know where my ancestors came from in Europe, so you don't know their background. No, they were not potentially slaves, most likely, but they also were definitely probably not people who were colonizing other countries. And you know, just saying like, you have no culture, and you know, white people don't bring anything good into this world. And it was very much like this mentality of, I am better than you, in fact, because I am Black.
Right.
I am Hispanic. I'm these things, so I am better than you, and you are actually trash. And despite the fact that the world doesn't recognize you're trash, I'm going to treat you like trash. Right. And I got upset. I was like, I don't know what I did to upset you. I'm sorry. I hope you get a therapist and work on those wounds. But
I'm on that,
yeah. But there were like people like that, and then there were people who came alongside me, and despite the fact that there were certain things that I thought that they definitely did not agree with, they were willing to say like, let me hear your story, and then let me tell you mine. And I'm going to give a shout out to Chelsea right now, because she was definitely like the biggest influence in that. Our stories just are so similar, despite the fact that I'm white. But, you know, we're not the same race. And she was willing to hear my story of being someone who definitely experienced, you know, people being hateful towards me in my hometown because of situations that I can't control. I don't decide my parents' economic status. I don't decide where I live. I don't decide these things. I'm 6. Right. Hi. But then she also had this, you know, a story of experiencing intense racism to an extent I had never seen. Because the thing about my town is that I would say the worst racism got was like comments made, that such as the one I told you about, of like what, you know, people are attracted to and stuff. And those are conversations that were generally held between just white people. And then other things would be like just really nasty jokes. But they weren't even on the level of like the nastiness of the jokes that Chelsea has been told by people. And to hear someone's story of having people joke about like going overseas to kill your family, and being told things like, oh wow, you're pretty, I'd kiss you, you're pretty for a brown girl, and stuff like that. And like, again, that's a mindset of, you are less than, and you are therefore less attractive, less desirable, less wanted, less worthy of my attention solely because of the color of your skin. Right. But you know what, you get a pass. It's like that mindset that people grow up with, and you know, just the amount of racism that was in her hometown. To hear that, I think that was like my biggest wake up call, was hearing that and realizing, wow, like racism to that extent still happens today. And it's not a freak case of like every once in a while, like this is something that is continuous. And so like we found common ground with our stories, and then we were able to discuss different topics that like, this is what white people say that make me mad, and this is what people of color say that make me mad. And we were able to like discuss those things, discuss different mindsets and sayings, and and explain to each other like where we're coming from when we say that. Like, I think the most helpful one and productive one was being able to explain what someone means when they say, I don't see color. Mm-hmm. So me explaining that, and then her being able to explain why it makes someone who is a person of color, like is a Black person, Hispanic, whatever, makes them genuinely upset. And
it's like that eraser you talked about.
Yeah, and that's what it is to them. And white people don't realize that because, like I mentioned a moment ago, we don't take where we came from nearly as seriously as other groups do. You know, I explained to her, you know, finding out where you came from. Like, I'm mostly Scottish. Yeah, that's where for the most part my family is from. You know, it's like, that's just a fun fact. You know, who my ancestors were, that's just a fun fact. My ancestors used to be nobility in Scotland. That's just a fun fact about myself. It doesn't define me as a person. It doesn't have any weight in my identity. It's just, that's nice. But I would have more of an identity steeped in being an American than being, you know, a descendant of someone who came from Scotland. And for so many other people, that is not how it is for them. And so you know, I was able to explain, you know, when I think that, I don't say it anymore because I know it's just not productive to say. People are going to get upset. The mindset of why people say that is, and I've actually been able to talk to some other people recently, some older people, and a lot of them say that they were taught it because that was something taught to me. And they said that a lot of them were actually taught it by people who were directly talking about the I have a dream speech. Whether or not this is how Martin Luther King wanted it to be interpreted is up for debate. But it's the idea of, when I look at you, I'm not going to decide your character, decide your worth, decide your value, decide your economic status, whether or not you must be a good or bad person on the color of your skin. I'm going to see an individual before I see the stereotypes that society would like to label you as. And I do genuinely believe that's what most people mean when they say, I don't see color. Or I'm colorblind. It's, I don't look at a person, you know, I don't look at a Black guy down the street and think he's going to attack me. I don't see a Hispanic and think he's lazy. I don't see an Asian and think he must be, I don't know, good at math or something. Some stereotype. And then she was able to explain, like, our ethnicity, our culture, our heritage is so important to us that it does, to an extent, define who we are. And, you know, she listened to where I came from, and then I listened to where she came from. We found mutual respect for each other, and it makes it where you're not immediately having this knee-jerk reaction of like, you're trying to erase me, or you're trying to make me a racist now as I'm trying to say something that I think is helpful. And so I think people underestimate the power of their story. Like, when it comes to all of this stuff, people get so obsessed with like, I want to see the raw numbers, and I want the stats and stuff, despite the fact that statistics and polls can be weighed to whatever bias you want. It's very easily manipulated.
Yes.
You know, that people underestimate the power of their story. And as Christians, I think we are definitely not doing something right if we underestimate the power of our story and putting, you know, numbers and statistics, while those are good, we're refusing to even hear the anecdotal data about this stuff. There's a reason why we are encouraged to give our testimony as Christians. So for you to say, like, in this case where we're talking about racism and we're talking about race and this is a sin issue, why wouldn't you tell your testimony? Why wouldn't you tell your story? Why wouldn't you tell your experience? And, you know, for me, being able to meet people like you and Chelsea and Kira and Desiree, people who have been willing to share their story and then hear mine and not try and erase each other's, because white people get upset when they have this preconceived idea of what a person of color's life is like, and then someone gives them a story that breaks that. Right. And then people of color are the same exact way. Mm-hmm. They hear a story that doesn't line up with their idea of what it means to be a white person in America, and their immediate response is to get upset. And that shouldn't be the response. It should be, let me hear your story. If it makes me uncomfortable, maybe I should be asking myself why, and not trying to erase your experience now because It makes me uncomfortable. Right. So I think it's just so important to not look at people as, you know, this person I have to fight against. It's not Black people against white people, or any race against any race. Like, another thing I've been thinking about this whole entire time is remembering, you know, Scripture says that the war isn't against flesh and blood. It's against, you know, the spirits of this, you know, of the world. It's against Satan. It's against sin.
Pop off.
Like, that's something we have to be remembering, is that this shouldn't be a fight between person against person. This is a fight against sin. This is a fight against darkness that wants to continue to infect our everyday lives. Right. Satan doesn't want us breaking generational curses of racism in people's families. Mm-mm. And so when you start getting upset, no matter what color you are, no matter where your background is, if you start getting upset when you hear these topics, your immediate response should not be, let me find all the evidence to defend myself for why you're wrong for making me uncomfortable, and ask yourself instead, why am I uncomfortable? Mm-hmm. Why do I get upset by hearing that a Black person is persecuted? Why do I get upset when I hear that a white person's life isn't easy? Like, that sounds like a heart issue that you need to work on. And there is grace and love in that. And there's people who want to walk alongside you, but you have to be willing to lay down your pride and say, I'm not always right. It's not erasing your experience. It's not, you know, telling you that your life is no longer valid and everything you went through is no longer valid. It's saying your life is not everyone else's. Your experience is not everyone else's. And if you have negative mindsets because of that, it's time to sit down and work on it. I just went on a really long tangent.
It's okay. It's fine. No, it's good stuff. I think that pretty much summed up where I wanted to end up. The whole thing about the road to peace not being peaceful means getting uncomfortable and doing exactly what you just said, and that every single white person you meet isn't going to have an easy life just because they're white, and every single Black person that you meet, breaking stereotypes, we all don't have horrible lives either. We go through oppression, we go through our own hardships, but I think conversations that can break those stereotypes and break preconceived notions are ones that are productive and helpful. I know everyone's not going to agree with that necessarily, but genuinely I think if we are truly working towards the same goal, I think everybody's voice matters, everybody's story matters. It's backed by Scripture, so shut up. And yeah, honestly, I just think I was talking with the youth group a little bit before I came on here, and we were talking about how this is going to be a long thing. And I know there's people that delusional is not the right word. It's not a nice word. I think it's the right word. Just to be bold, I think it's delusional to think that because we've been protesting in the streets for this long, because you've been sharing so many links on your stories and posting all these statuses, that now racism is going to be gone forever.
Yeah.
I wish, I really wish that it was that easy. I know that people, my grandma was around when Martin Luther King was doing his whole thing, and that just goes to show how long ago it wasn't that long ago. But they thought that it was over, and they thought that the world that they've created because of the fight that they went through, it meant that our lives were going to be a lot easier, that we wouldn't have to go through the things that they had to go through, and here we are again. I do believe wholeheartedly that the fight that our grandparents went through helped us get to where we are today. It was a checkpoint. It was a place to be like, okay, racism used to be almost encouraged in this country. It was like a good thing to be racist. And then now it's not. And what happened with that was like, okay, we're going to be silent about our racism. We're going to stop talking about it. And we're going to talk in a bunch of circles. We're going to do things behind the scenes that still get us what we want. However, we're just not going to be so obvious about it. And now, right now, we're making it like, hey, you're not silent. We can hear you. We can see. This is life. And now we're going to talk about it. Now we're going to do things against it. And I think that is another checkpoint. I think there's hope that this battle will be over one day. I just don't think it's going to be that easy. And that's that fight we're talking about. Just hearing other people's stories, there's so much power in your story, just hearing it now. So thank you so much for sharing it. And everyone viewing, one thing I like to do when we get ready to end these shows is step one is you feeling your emotions, you being able to get them out, and you being able to understand why you feel the way you feel. But step two is always action. Change starts with action. It starts with a thought, but it carries out through an action. You have to do something practical. So I think we talked about it a little bit. You covered it a little bit at the end there. But if you had any advice to anybody that I guess is having trouble with this whole trying to hear out somebody because of their own experience and what they think is going on because of their hard experience, you had any advice for someone that's wanting to do the right thing but is having difficulty, what would you say?